Brazil's former president Jair Bolsonaro will soon face a trial that could put his political future in jeopardy. The Superior Electoral Court scheduled for June 22nd a trial to decide whether Bolsonaro committed abuse of political power and misuse of the media. This week, we're going to explain what exactly these accusations mean and what could happen to Bolsonaro. I'm Gustavo Ribeiro, editor-in-chief of the Brazilian Report, and this is Brazil This Week Live. So this week I'm joined by Cede Silva, our Brasilia correspondent. Cede, how are you doing?
I'm great, Gustavo, and happy holiday to everyone.
Exactly, because we are recording this on June the 8th. Corpus Christi, it is a religious holiday in Brazil, but we are here working, bringing the news for you. So today, a lot of people, especially in the left, spent 4 years from 2019 to 2022 urging electoral authorities to act against Jair Bolsonaro. They wanted Congress to impeach him and make him ineligible for office. Now, Bolsonaro was able to finish his term, but now, less than 6 months after leaving office, he could face his comeuppance by the hands of the Electoral Court. So can you explain exactly, because abuse of political power and misuse of the media is a very broad accusation. So what is the case against Jair Bolsonaro?
First, as you've mentioned, electoral court in Brazil, especially the Superior Electoral Court, is very political, and it's very unclear about when it takes decisions. So we have seen before the electoral court taking decisions at a time when the request or the complaint is no longer actually valid. The electoral court is supposed to protect the public from politicians that will probably be voted in office by a section of the public, despite their many shortcomings or crimes or mistakes. This is the reason why we have, since 2010, the so-called Ficha Limpa Act, the Clean Slate Act, which bans a politician that has been convicted in a higher court from running for office. The understanding being that some people are willing to vote for the crook, they're willing to vote for the criminal, and so the law exists to protect the larger public from people that will vote for this politician regardless of those convictions. The Electoral Court is supposed to function in the same way. This complaint that is now going to be assessed by the judges on June 22, as you said, this complaint was filed last year before the elections. And the complaint was because of this abuse of power, President Bolsonaro cannot run for re-election. He needs to be rendered unfit for re-election now. And the Electoral Court did not take action before the election. And now it is very bravely, very courageously only doing this action now and doing this trial now after Mr. Bolsonaro lost re-election, does no longer have office, does no longer have the pen or the power to nominate judges and people allied to judges to other courts.
And by the way, just to your point, so this, and you're going to delve into the specifics of the accusations, but this lawsuit was filed in August. So like you said, they wanted Bolsonaro to be barred from running altogether. And like you said, the times and movements of the electoral courts are often seen as very political because of the way that they sometimes take too long or go too fast, depending on who the defendant is. And I remember the Dilma Rousseff, Michel Temer campaign was accused of illegal financing, and the electoral court began looking at these if I remember, like 4 years after she was finishing her term, when actually something that would, in theory, have prevented her from taking office altogether. So
Yes, and the final trial in the case of Dilma only really took place after Dilma was impeached, because the objective at the time was to remove her vice president, then President Michel Temer, from office. So it was a complaint against the Dilma-Temer ticket. While Dilma was president, it did not come to a final vote. And only after Dilma was impeached and now that Temer was president, then it was an opportunity to remove Temer from office. And then was took to a trial, but there was not a majority of votes, and President Temer remained in office. We've also had a similar case by the Superior Electoral Court now with the impeachment of Congressman Deltan Dallagnol. Deltan Dallagnol is a congressman. He was impeached in a very controversial ruling, baseless in my understanding of the facts and from what I've read.
And on the understanding of a lot of legal experts as well, because because he sorry, but he was his election was nullified because he was considered to be one of these cases that the clean slate law removes from any race. Federal prosecutors, if they're facing disciplinary processes, cannot just quit their jobs in order to escape punishment. But Deltan was not yet under any sort of investigation, so that's why I would agree with you, even if. And the thing is, because Deltan Dallagnol, as a prosecutor, made several abuses of his office, many people just think that his impeachment was justified no matter what.
Yes. Regardless, the case of Deltan Dallagnol took precedence to Bolsonaro's case. The Superior Electoral Court put that case in the agenda first. Deltan Dallagnol was impeached last month in May by the Superior Electoral Court, and now the House has complied with that decision. Why didn't they took Bolsonaro's case to trial first? Why was Mr. Dallagnol, his case, why was he tried first rather than Mr. Bolsonaro? We do not know. There's no transparency in how the Superior Electoral Court decides to take which cases first or which cases later. So the left-wing Labor Democratic Party, the PDT, filed that complaint back in August before the elections, because that was the time, and this is the case for our readers to understand, that was the time when then President Bolsonaro hosted dozens of foreign ambassadors at the presidential residence here in Brasilia for a presentation on how the electoral system is supposedly flawed. He showed absolutely no evidence. He just bragged mostly about things that could or possibly happen with the electoral system. And he, without mentioning Lula's name, he made a very direct message to the ambassadors that he asked the ambassadors to request their capitals, their governments, not to recognize a Lula victory early and rather wait for something to be done rather than recognize the election as soon. And at the time, as we show in the Brazilian report, there was an ongoing campaign by U.S. government authorities in order for them to tell Brazil very publicly, not off the record, but very publicly, that the U.S. government was going to recognize the election results as declared by the Electoral Court very quickly, which was a message that the United States would not comply, would not support any sort of military coup or any sort of disturbance similar to what happened in the US itself in 2020 with supposed fabricated controversy about whether or not Biden had won. And the US government, the Biden administration, was very clear. As soon as the result is in, we're going to congratulate the president-elect, whoever he is, and that is it. And Bolsonaro was concerned about this, and he was so clearly concerned that he invited these dozens of foreign diplomats, including at the time the then acting chief of the U.S. Embassy in Brazil, Doug Conniff, who attended the meeting. So the complaint by the PDT, the complaint by this left-wing party is President Bolsonaro abuses political power in this instance because as president at the time, he had the power and the authority to invite foreign ambassadors to his residence, which is a power that other candidates do not have. No presidential candidate, even Lula, even a powerful presidential candidate, could not simply invite dozens of foreign ambassadors at the same time and expect them to all attend, as the president does, because that's a power that the president enjoys. And this is why he committed abuse of power. And not only he abused his power as candidate, by using his prerogatives as president that he enjoys over the foreign ambassadors, he used them to falsely and with no evidence at all to attack the electoral system. And this is the reason why there is the complaint. We do not know what is the vote of Electoral Ombudsman Justice Benedito Gonçalves, who is will cast the first vote in this trial. But it is very likely that he will approve the complaint and will vote for Mr. Bolsonaro to be rendered unfit for office in the next 8 years. And the reason we know that is not, once again, not because of background sources or off-the-record sources. The reason we know that is because very publicly, people close to Mr. Bolsonaro and Mr. Bolsonaro himself have already tried to minimize an upcoming loss at the Electoral Court. For example,
and they take for granted that he will be rendered
precisely,
ineligible.
And they're taken for granted in a chance as to save face. They know that you're going to lose, and so they treat it as not important in order to make your defeat seem less significant. For example, Valdemar,
and also to portray it as a conspiracy by these political elites that could not bear this of the system leader as Bolsonaro, as they try to portray Bolsonaro.
Precisely, right? Because they can't win against the so-called deep state, which is a term that is also used by the Brazilian far right, inspired by the U.S. far right. And so they can't win against the deep state because these authorities and judicial activism, which is also a term used by the right wing in both the U.S. and Brazil, they can't win against the supposed judicial activism.
And today, before we continue, I just want to interrupt you a little bit to talk to our viewers and ask them to support the Brazilian Report, which is the journalistic engine behind these broadcasts. We have a subscription-based business model, so please go to Brazilian.report/subscribe, and you can see different membership tiers, one of which will fit your needs and your budget. You can also go to buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report and make a donation to fill up a coffee mug of one of our journalists. You can do that on a monthly basis or on a one-off basis. And if you choose one of the memberships, you get exclusive content such as behind-the-scenes newsletters. You're going to see how we do our journalism, which is, but I mean, without any false modesty, it's pretty interesting because we are a small newsroom. We have amassed a boatload of awards, and we have just been shortlisted in 5 categories for the 2023 Digiday Media Awards. And these categories are Best Newsletter, Best Podcast, Best Story, Editorial Team of the Year, and Media Company of the Year. And we are running against the likes of the Washington Post, New York Times Advertising, Axios. I mean, a lot of big names in the media industry, and we're a small team in São Paulo, in Paraná, and in Brasilia. So please help us continue to do our work. Now, today, going back to the Bolsonaro trial, I think another element that allows us to...
let me just get back to how we know.
Sure.
How do we know that Bolsonaro and his allies expect to be defeated? Sure. Valdemar Costa Neto is the chairman of Bolsonaro's Liberal Party. He's a very seasoned Brazilian politician, and he pays services to whoever is in power. He was once an important player to the Lula administration, the original old school Lula administration back in 2010. Valdemar Costa Neto, early this year, while Bolsonaro was in a self-imposed exile in Florida, Valdemar Costa Neto was already using his influence in media to give interviews and to offer former First Lady Michele Bolsonaro, Bolsonaro's wife, as an alternative to Bolsonaro. And he was already trying to portray that Michele Bolsonaro could have the support from people who are already Bolsonaristas, but would not carry the rejection that anti-Bolsonaro people have. So he was already portraying months before the trial that Michele Bolsonaro would pose as an alternative. And there are other sectors in the Liberal Party, such as Senator Rogério Marinho, who is the leader of the opposition in the Senate, and a former Bolsonaro minister, and other Bolsonaro loyalists. They have come forward to say that, well, if this happens, it is something that we have to accept, but there is a path to the future, and there is a Bolsonarista future without Bolsonaro, which is a strong indication that they already expect Bolsonaro to be rendered unfit for office, and they have other plans to stay in power and to promote a new Bolsonarismo without Bolsonaro.
No, and I would add to your point another few elements that I think allow us to believe that there might be no path for Bolsonaro to escape a conviction here, because one, his party, by means of through Valdemar Costa Neto, who you just described, formally tried to overturn the electoral results. And after the second round, filed a lawsuit trying to make a boatload of voting machines to cast doubt on them and say, okay, these machines should be removed. Machines that were mostly concentrated in Lula-leaning areas. And given it was such a slim difference between Lula and Bolsonaro in the final vote, 51-49, that it was a move clearly designed for Bolsonaro to get those votes, to find those votes, to use a term that Donald Trump used in 2020. And that, I mean, clashes with how electoral courts are positioning themselves in regards to attacks to the credibility of the voting system. They have made several stances, including impeaching a state lawmaker for using his social media channels to spread false information about the voting system. So, I mean, it's not as if Brazilian higher courts really followed their own precedent, but in this particular case, I think this is, I mean, not at all a hot take to say that it is more likely than not that they will follow their precedent. And additionally, and that's something I want to ask you to explain in more detail. Earlier this year, they have accepted into evidence some pretty damning elements that, I mean, make Bolsonaro more guilty than sin, right?
Well, yes. So what happened was, after the January 8 riots, the federal police started investigating things related to the riots, how the riots were organized and so on. And so they went to the house here in Brasilia of former Justice Minister Anderson Torres. So Anderson Torres served as Bolsonaro's Justice Minister. And when Bolsonaro's single term was done, he accepted the job as Brasilia's top security official. So he took over his new job on January 2nd, and then he immediately went to vacation in Florida rather than, working on his new job. And so it was very...
And of all places, Florida, right? I mean, very serendipitous.
Yes, and where Mr. Bolsonaro also was, etc. So while he was in Florida, already in the position of Brazil's top security official, the January 8 riots took place, and thousands of pro-Bolsonaro demonstrators ransacked the buildings housing the three branches of government in Brazil. A lot of damage was committed, and it was a very similar event to January 6, 2021. So the federal police goes to the house of Anderson Torres, and he's not in there because he's still in Florida. And when the federal police goes into the Anderson Torres house, they find a draft decree, which is very mysterious. This decree has provisions that would have the president place part of Brazil in a state of defense. And this state of defense would allow a committee of people, mostly of them appointed by the Ministry of Defense, which is heavy with military people. And they would basically do an intervention in the Superior Electoral Court. So if this state of defense was decreed at the time before Bolsonaro left Brazil, this would enable them to place the Electoral Court under intervention and very possibly declare that actually Lula lost the election and Bolsonaro won. This decree was not used. It was never published. It was never put to effect. However, the fact that the federal police found this draft decree at the home of Anderson Torres was an indication that he, who had served as Bolsonaro's justice minister, was involved in discussions about an actual coup, a top-down coup declared by authorities in Brasilia and having the executive and the military intervene in the election results, which in Brazil are organized by the judicial branch. So lawyers in the left-wing PDT, they requested this draft decree to be included as evidence in the same complaint, in the same trial about Bolsonaro abusing his power by inviting foreign ambassadors. Theoretically, both events are not immediately related, even in time, because at the time when Bolsonaro made the invitation to the foreign ambassadors back in the middle of the year, this was before the elections. And the decree, all signs point that the decree was actually drafted after the elections results. And it was not presented to the ambassadors. They're not immediately related. However, the PDT party argued, and the justices agreed, the electoral court justices agreed, that they are related in the sense that there is a narrative that Bolsonaro, as president, abused his political power and had an intention or had a plan to execute a formal coup despite not having done so. And so this evidence will be discussed. It will be a place or a part in the vote that Ombudsman Benedito Gonçalves will present in the trial.
Now, another, I wouldn't say trial, but investigation is happening in Congress. And it has started a few weeks ago, the January 8th hearings. And of course, they will talk about these events that we are discussing today. Now, do you see any way where Bolsonaro's trial may affect the hearings committee in Congress or vice versa?
Well, yeah, so we will have to see that. I'm going to follow that very closely because the trial was scheduled for now June 22. It is very likely it will not end on June 22. The justices like to read very lengthy votes. They like to appear on television, and the trial will take place probably for 1 week or two. And we could see the possibility that one of the ministers, one of the justices, demands more time. And the thing is, Congress only takes recess later in July. So this means that Congress will have an opportunity, if the trial ends by late June, Congress will still have some weeks to answer to reply to what happens in the trial, to react. That was the word I was looking for. Congress will have time to react to the trial's decision. You will have pro-Lula, pro-government lawmakers claiming that the trial was fair. It is better that Bolsonaro is now unfit for office. And you have the pro-Bolsonaro opposition saying that the trial was unfair, that the deep state and judicial activism have barred a national hero from entering into politics again and have blocked him from politics. What we have shown in the Brazilian report, though, is that the select committee on the January 8 riots has already took to the conclusion that it will have two separate reports. There will be a report supported by the majority, who will endorse Rapporteur Senator Elisiane Gama in most factual things. And there will be a minority with people such as Senator Marcos Duval, Magno Malta, Marcel Van Hatten, etc., who will support a conspiracy report that somehow the left wing is actually to blame, and the people that they themselves, as Bolsonaristas, are going to jail, they're going to visit the people in jail, they're going to visit the prisoners, they're going to offer solidarity to them, and these people are somehow at the same time actually left-wing extremist infiltrated people at the
Yeah,
same time.
exactly. And this is a good thing to mention because this hearings committee, unlike what many people could think, was not an initiative of the left wing government to hammer down on these misdeeds by the far right. It was actually a movement by far right lawmakers who were hoping that by having this stage, they would be able to recast January 8th as a false flag operation orchestrated by Lula, which, there's absolutely no piece of evidence that suggests that was the case. We have seen, however, many people in the far right social media orchestrating massive protests on social media right out in the open. So, a lot of people who are in jail, they are in jail because they did everything in a very public fashion. So, yes, like you said, this is going to be highly contentious. And, both sides will not be able to agree on what consists of fact or factual truth, right?
Yes, there is just a sliver or shred of, I believe, reason on the part of the right in pointing that there was indeed some negligence on part of the Lula administration. And it is very clear to me the targets that they pick. So that the right wing in Brazil is very picky and has a very strong animosity towards Justice Minister Flávio Dino, who was very publicly clear that he knew about the attacks beforehand. Because on Saturday, January 7, Justice Flávio Dino tweeted that he was knowing about an upcoming quote-unquote war in Brasilia, and that he was talking to the government and he was taking some measures in his capacity to prevent the attacks from happening. But the thing is, Lula also has a defense minister, José Múcio Monteiro, who is very close to the military and who used to be Bolsonaro's very close friend. José Múcio Monteiro, in his capacity as defense minister and as commander of the military commanders, he had the prerogative to end the camp with putschist supporters, the camp with people that had rejected the elections results, that was nearby the Army's military headquarters, just a few kilometers here from my house. And José Múcio Monteiro, Lula's minister, did not use his authority to dismantle the camp. And in fact, he spoke in favor of the camp. And he said that he had friends and relatives inside the camp. And of course, the camp was fundamental as a basis for gathering the crowd that would then storm the buildings on January 8. The right wing does not ever cite Minister José Múcio Monteiro, despite him being the guy that in all the Lula administration by far was the one that was most negligent, or dare I say responsible for January 8, because he had the authority to dismantle the camp, which was fundamental for the riots, and he did not. But they like to pick on Justice Minister Flávio Dino, who had very different responsibilities. But I would like to see the select committee clarify the role of the Lula government. General Gonçalves Dias was in charge of security, and Defense Minister José Múcio Monteiro, because they had a week of the Lula administration. They had a week in power to dismantle the camp, and they refused to do so. And in that aspect, the right wing does have a reason in pointing that the Lula administration does have a role, even though very small, but it does have an important role in January 8 as well.
And by the way, okay, 1 week is a very short time, but we have to remember that in Brazil, there's a hiatus of 2 months between the election day and inauguration day, where we have a transition team that works and tries to set up policies that can be enacted as soon as the new government takes over. So, I mean, yes, it's just 1 week, but it's actually more than just 1 week in practical terms, because we have this transition period. So, I mean, they knew they were going to be the ones in power.
Yes,
so
Minister Múcio, he held this press conference on January 2nd. So already on January 2nd, he was being asked, he was being pressured to dismantle the camp, and he did not do so.
Exactly. And of course, today we will pay close attention to these developments. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your holiday. And I hope to see you soon in the next live broadcast.
Thank you. The same to you, and a happy Corpus Christi to everyone.
And by the way, just one last reminder, we live off subscriptions, so please go and subscribe to the Brazilian Report, Brazilian.report/subscribe. You can also donate a cup of coffee to one of our journalists. We have this QR code right next to CD on the bottom right corner of your screen. You just flash it, and it will take you to the Buy Me a Coffee membership page, and you can have make a monthly contribution to the Brazilian Report, and in exchange, you will get a lot of exclusive content that is a plus from our journalistic content in our website. So, Sade, thank you very much. Thank you all for bearing with us, and we hope you have a good Corpus Christi holiday. Bye-bye.
All right.